Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we are undertaking a pretty serious deep dive. We're looking into the architecture of student success, specifically how institutions formally recognize and maybe more importantly, enforce scholar commitments. Our source material today is the internal documentation, the detailed breakdown, really, of the American Dream Scholars or ADS pinning ceremony. This one was held at Miami-Dade College. And our mission isn't just, reporting on who spoke or what happened. We want to understand the institutional strategy here. How did MDC engineer this event? Because it feels like it serves two purposes. A big celebration, sure, but also a formal way to reinforce the high standards you need to keep a scholarship like this. It's almost like a blueprint for using ritual to, well, maximize scholar retention.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here for you, the learner, is seeing just how detailed the mechanics of this blueprint are. We're really looking at how a huge educational institution uses a single pretty high-touch ceremony and uses it to reinforce dedication towards, long-term goals. It's kind of proof that getting organizational buy-in, well, it often requires some kind of formal ritual. And just to set the stage properly for you, this specific event was celebrating the 80th class of 2027. It happened on Thursday, November 6, 2025. And it was specifically at Miami-Dade College's West Campus. The fact that the sources are so meticulous, detailing the location, the specific cohort, it tells you this wasn't just some general annual thing. No, this was a highly targeted affirmation for a very specific group, their status, essentially.
Absolutely. And the sources, they start by describing the structure, right? And what jumped out at me immediately was the thinking behind the setup before the main event. It kicked off with a warm reception. Now, that sounds maybe trivial, but I think it's critical for creating that buy-in we talked about. It lets students, faculty, campus leaders, and this is crucial, family members connect before the formal program. That shared emotional space, it kind of ensures the entire support network feels invested in the public commitment that's about to happen.
That makes sense. If you're trying to maximize the impact of, like, a commitment ceremony, you really want every stakeholder there. You want the student, the family, the institution all feeling interconnected in that room. And you can see that integration reflected almost immediately in how they elevated the student voices.
That's right. The feeling seemed immediately authentic because the masters of ceremony were actually ADS scholars themselves, Eva Molina and Sebastian Minervini. They were guiding the audience, the sources say, with pride and enthusiasm. So it wasn't, some administrator starting the show. It was peers talking to peers. They instantly owned the narrative.
And that sense of ownership, it transitions perfectly into the more formal institutional support. The speaking schedule, as it's documented, it shows a very deliberate, almost vertical integration of buy-in. You start right near the top. Dr. Andrew Carbon, the Dean of Students at MDC West Campus, he opened with remarks emphasizing, dedication and perseverance. He's the authority figure providing that gravitas. But it didn't just stop with the dean's office, did it?
No, not at all.
The inclusion of the Student Government Association, represented by the treasurer, Samuel Suarez, that shows the link between this ADS group and the wider campus structure, the political structure even. It signals to the scholars, look, you're not just some separate program off on its own, you're actually central to campus life. And then, of course, you hear from the scholar leadership itself. The ADS Club president, Raul Barocio Rivera, gave an address. So that layering institutional authority, student government, and then the club leadership, and make sure everyone seems to be speaking with one voice of support.
That structural framework definitely sets the stage. But the next phase, that seems to be about pure inspiration. The sources reveal this careful selection of the keynote speaker, Humberto Zelaya. He's the director of the MDC Information Center. But the title that really defines his role here, it's what the sources call him, an ADS champion. Yeah, that designation champion, it tells you something, doesn't it? He's likely someone who hasn't just succeeded within the institution, but someone who's actively mentored these students, advocated for them, maybe even embodied the values the scholarship promotes. He's there to inspire belief in the whole system.
Exactly. And if the keynote provides that broad sort of institutional inspiration, the segment right after it seems designed to make that inspiration feel immediate, relatable. The source documentation pivots directly to a fireside chat. And this brings us to what I think is a crucial element, tailored social proof. Because this wasn't just, one student giving a testimony.
Right, there were 5 of them.
Exactly. MDC strategically selected 5 distinct scholars. Miss Halima Olabisi, Mr. Raul Barocio Rivera, who also spoke earlier, Mrs. Paula Lucero, Mr. Francisco Cartado, and Mrs. Jessica Ratana. Now, why 5? Well, institutions, especially large ones, understand the power of micro-representation. You list 5 different vices, 5 different stories, so that someone in that audience, maybe someone struggling with a particular academic path or family commitments or some personal obstacle, they can almost always see themselves reflected in at least one of those success stories up on stage.
That's a really fascinating insight. It's like calculated validation. The sources state that their personal stories focus specifically on the transformative power of education.
Yeah.
So when you have 5 different paths, all leading to the same kind of success on that stage, well, that transformative power moves from just being an abstract idea. It becomes something achievable, something real for pretty much everyone in the room.
Precisely. So for you, the learner, this part really demonstrates that in strategic educational programming, inspiration has to be diverse. It needs to feel immediately relatable. But, inspiration can be fleeting. And this is where the MDC sources reveal, well, a pretty brilliant, maybe even abrupt strategic pivot.
You bring up an interesting point about that pivot, because immediately after this, like highly emotional, transformative chat, the narrative shifts sharply. It goes straight into mandated commitment and accountability. It's a very quick transition.
Yeah, I was wondering how the sources handled that potential emotional whiplash, right? You go from these 5 probably deeply moving testimonials directly into what sounds like an informative, almost administrative session. What the sources seem to show is that the institution intentionally used that emotional high. They leverage that feeling of belonging, of potential success, by immediately transitioning to, well, the gatekeeper, student success advisor, Mr. Andres Arnavat.
That's right. His role wasn't celebratory at all. It was purely functional, it seems. The source material says he delivered an informative presentation, and its critical function was, quote, reminding students of the importance of maintaining their American Dream scholarship. It's like the essential reality check, putting the serious obligations, the rules, right on the heels of all that celebration and inspiration.
Absolutely. The ritual part would be kind of meaningless if the commitment wasn't immediately quantified, right? Made concrete. And the most symbolic, the most critical function of this whole phase seems to be the ADS pledge. This was a highly formalized reaffirmation of their duty, their commitment.
And crucially, who led the pledge? It was a peer leader, Emma Elhosh, the vice president of SGA at West Campus. That choice of leader feels strategic, too. It suggests the commitment isn't just top-down, mandated by the administration. It's also peer-enforced, peer-supported.
And what's most significant about that pledge, I think, is the dual commitment it actually demands. It shows the scope of this scholarship's ambition. The students committed publicly to 2 core pillars: academic excellence and community impact. So this is clearly more than just getting good grades. It signals that MDC is investing in future civic leaders, not just scholars. The commitment isn't just to their GPA, it's also to the community around them. It requires them to balance their personal achievement with a sense of collective responsibility.
Okay, so if the pledge is the verbal commitment, the spoken word, then the pinning ceremony itself is the physical symbol of that new status. This was clearly the climax of the whole evening. The source material explicitly states this action led again by institutional authority. Dr. Carbon marked the highlight of the evening. That act, receiving the pin, it physically transitions the student status, doesn't it? They move from being just an applicant or maybe a scholar in training to being a formally recognized commitment holder. And that tangible object, the pin now carries the weight of both those inspirational stories they just heard and the dual commitment they just recited aloud.
It really is the institutional handshake, isn't it? Formalizing the agreement. So they've celebrated the journey so far, they've secured the explicit commitment, and they've provided the official status marker, the pin. But the MDC documentation shows that they didn't just let the evening end right there on that high note. They needed to anchor this new status into a forward trajectory, point it towards the future.
And that transition, that pivot towards the future, seems like it was also meticulously handled by the final speaker. That was Suze Guillaume, the Director of Advisement and Career Services. She delivered the closing remarks.
Yeah, and this specific sequencing, it feels key. Think about it. Dr. Carbon, the dean, represents institutional authority. He validated their current academic status by pinning them. But Suze Guillaume, representing career services, future guidance, employment connections, she closes the event. By giving the final word to the director responsible for what comes next, the institution ensures the ceremony is positioned not as, like, the peak achievement, but really as a transitional milestone. The message seems pretty clear. Okay, the celebration's done. Now the real work towards your career and your civic impact begins.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner? Well, the ceremony successfully wrapped up with, the sources say, a strong sense of pride and accomplishment. That's important. But the real takeaway, I think, is the structural intention behind the whole event. It was clearly a well-executed plan. It didn't rely on just inspiration or just rules. It very strategically married both.
Definitely. If we look back at the source material, the whole design reveals this very intentional architecture. They opened with that warm, family-inclusive reception. They used those 5 scholars for diverse social proof. And then, almost immediately after, they followed up with the mandatory accountability check, that was Mr. Arnavat, and the civic requirements baked into the pledge.
It really makes you rethink the definition of support in an educational program like this, doesn't it?
Right.
It's not just, say, financial aid or tutoring. It's also about having clear, maybe even enforced boundaries and expectations.
Indeed. And think about that closing sequence again. The MDC sources showed they prioritized the dean, the authority figure, to perform the actual pinning. But the director of career services, the future focus, delivered the final remarks. They carefully separated the validation of the present achievement from the setting of the future goal. So for you, the learner, consider this intentional sequencing. What does it communicate about the institution's long-term expectations for its scholars, especially when the big authority validates their current status, but the person connected to their future career gets the final word? Something to think about.